Arizona Congressman Trent Frank says he'll step down at the end of January. The House Ethics Committee opened an investigation into sex harassment allegations against Franks yesterday. In a statement, he said, quote, "I have absolutely never physically intimidated, coerced, or had or attempted to have any sexual contact with any member of my congressional staff," end quote. But Franks admits he made two former female subordinates feel uncomfortable by discussing fertility issues, saying he deeply regrets that it caused distress in the workplace. There's more. The House Ethics Panel says it is also expanding its investigation into Texas Congressman Blake Farenthold, also a Republican, over allegations he sexually harassed a former member of his staff and retaliated against her for complaining. Farenthold denied wrongdoing when that case was settled. I see you nodding your head when this becomes bipartisan. The accountability, why?
I think it needs to be bipartisan, but I do think that there needs to be due process. But I have to be honest, the Franks thing is weird to me, but I don't know why he resigned. Maybe there's more that's going to come out. I thought it was creepy, but I didn't think it was like Roy Moore or the allegations against Frank or like, you know, the other people that have gotten some national attention. This is getting real muddy for me. I got to be honest, as a man, I feel very uncomfortable because I believe that there's a lot of allegations going out without due process. I think some of them warrant it after people make public statements or some of the evidence is presented. But, and we're going to talk about this later in the show, when you have things like the Roy Moore case, which I was critical of the guy, and then the supposed victim says, hey, I forged the date in the yearbook, that's problematic for me.
Well, it's just that she added the date. She didn't say she forged the note from Roy Moore.
Well, that's still forgery. You can't add a date to a signature.
I understand. I'm just saying we need the complete picture of what happened there. And I agree with you. And I saw last night when Franks made his resignation that there were people, media reporters, saying there is more to the story that will come out in the days to come. So
well, we'll see. But nonetheless, it hurts her credibility, Beverly Young Nelson, for now saying that she did something that she otherwise claimed she didn't. But on the due process angle, I want to read a quote from Jeremy Piven, the actor. I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of him because I think it's the most succinct quote I've heard from someone. And he said, "We seem to be entering dark times. Allegations are being printed as facts and lives are being put in jeopardy without a hearing, due process, or evidence." And as I mentioned yesterday, in the 24-hour news cycle, social media, this mob mentality, how do we get this right where we are weeding out bad actors that should not be in the workforce, that are committing horrible acts against women that are completely inappropriate and wrong, but without taking down and innocent people getting sucked up in this?
Let me
and I think
add
it's so important to strike that balance.
Kennedy, as we talk about this, this is not an even playing field. So when the women, you know, bravely speak out, their voices are heard differently than the people in power, these men. So when you talk about due process, that's why you have an ethics committee. So then I ask the question, why are these men circumventing them? Why is Al Franken exiting before the ethics committee has had a chance to look at him? Why is Trent Franks exiting? Is it because of the rally call, or are there more parts to the story? I don't think we can answer that. But there is due process in place in some regards.
And I think, you know, what you have to be kind of careful of is activating the mob and letting the mob mentality take over, because what happens is you lose sight of that ultimate goal. You lose sight of protecting victims and making sure that men and women are in places where power is not used to abuse and squash and intimidate and coerce them. That's what you have to do. But the problem is, once you taste a little bit of blood, it really does activate this mentality that can become so dangerous. It almost consumes itself and takes up all of the energy and totally takes the focus away from where it's supposed to be. And in the end, that ends up hurting victims.
Well, and to your point, Kennedy, I mean, we can go back to Ferguson and Officer Darren Wilson, who was essentially indicted by the media and the public before the justice process was even able to play itself out. So, I mean, we do have to be careful, but also to get back to the victims and the people who are making these claims as well. You go on Capitol Hill, you can look at the Office of Compliance, and the deck is clearly stacked against them. So I think it's important for Congress to also make those changes, which we've seen bipartisan legislation
we know
introduced.
The deck is stacked against the women and the men, and I like the fact that you brought that up because we're talking about power here.
Right.
It's more about power than it is about any other category, gender or whatever. But what's interesting is the fact that, you know, you didn't have a shush fund for the people who were being accused. You had it for the victims. So we do want to be honest about how we look at giving victims a voice. And part of that is due process. It doesn't serve anybody, including the victims, not to get to the truth.
That's a great point.
Jessica?
I absolutely agree, and I feel very conflicted over Al Franken's resignation yesterday. It was trial by jury of 30-plus senators. It had nothing to do with the voters of Minnesota. It didn't have to do, certainly, with the Republicans, who overwhelmingly backed him staying there for the due process reason, and also the nature of the allegations compared to what some other people have been accused of. So it's a tough one because I know that Democrats are obviously after the moral high ground here, and we're going into a special election on Tuesday.
So was he a political chip? I mean, was he a political sacrifice?
I think you could see that in his face and how upset he was about this.
Also,
and I understand the complaints that he didn't apologize and he denied a lot of the allegations, but I think
because
he certainly does
apologize
see himself
before,
as that.
and that's what's really interesting, and I think that's a contrast you're drawing because he did show more contrition when he first came out, and also his colleagues were all, and that's my problem with the Democratic Party is they have this authoritarian lockstep where they give you the talking points and you parrot them.
And
so
that's
the
it.
first set of talking points were let's let the ethics committee figure this out and we'll see what happens, due process. And now, yesterday, once Kristen Gillibrand put out that Facebook post,
But I think she is the key figure here.
What's interesting about it, too,
should have been impeached. She's clearly
well, she said that early on, and then her people walked it back so far it almost didn't leave the House again.
But she's
so let me
clearly
get this in because we want to go forward with the conversation, and you touched on it. It has to do with Al Franken's new refreshed sort of reaction to the allegations against him. Do we have that to watch? Let's watch.
I also think it gave some people the false impression that I was admitting to doing things that, in fact, I haven't done. Some of the allegations against me are simply not true. Others I remember very differently.
Huh. Well, that was different from that first news conference he gave when he came back and said how apologetic he was. He wanted to be part of the national conversation to lift women's voices.
A couple of things. I don't think he's going anywhere. That's the first thing.
You don't think but he says
gave
he's
himself
You think it was
the
a fake
leeway.
out?
weeks.
Right. What does that mean?
So
every other person, Frank's even said, hey, this date, I'm out.
End of
I'm
January.
The other representatives that, were sending extramarital affairs pictures to in Texas, they said, this date, I'm out. He's the only one that left it open.
Out today.
Right, out. I don't think he's going anywhere. Number two,
Can you
honestly,
rescind a resignation, though?
Well, he said
Apparently
he'll
he didn't
resign
give
in
a
the
date.
coming weeks.
Yeah,
he was very unclear. I think he wants
Yeah,
to
but
see
there
what
are
happens in
8
Alabama.
women with allegations against him now. This is not a situation where and just have the picture of him putting his hands or supposedly putting his hands on a sleeping woman, which by definition is non-consensual
and if it's
you're
true,
asleep.
it's wrong, though. But I still believe that there needs to be due process. And Jessica, you said something earlier. You said the voters should decide. Well, do you believe that they should decide in all of these cases? In the Roy Moore decision, should the voters decide there as well?
The Roy Moore situation, I certainly think it is his right to have stayed in the race. I think that it is a terrible choice that the voters in Alabama have to make between a liberal Democrat and someone who is credibly accused of these atrocious acts. I wish that they had an alternative that means that they could get their judge picks, that they could get someone who is pro-life, which I know is hugely important to the evangelical population in Alabama. And I feel sorry for them. I hope I never have to face a choice like that. So you think they should decide? But I do think they should decide. And then I think there's also reason that the Senate can vote to expel someone that they do not think should be a member of the Senate. And then you'll get your Republican appointee after that.
But to the point about expelling, this would be unprecedented to expel a duly elected senator when the voters had full knowledge of the allegations made against him. So there's also a dangerous precedent. And there's been times in history where a party has controlled 2/3 majority in the Senate. So is this used in the future as a political tool? I think these are important things to be thinking about.
All right, breaking news is about to break into this conversation. The UN Security Council is holding a special session right now on President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and as well move our embassy, U.S. Embassy, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem as that new capital. The U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, you see her there, speaking now. Let's watch together.
Decision does. The president has announced that the United States recognizes the obvious, that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. He has also instructed the State Department to begin the process of relocating the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That is what the president has done. And this is what he has not done. The United States has not taken a position on boundaries or borders. The specific dimensions of sovereignty over Jerusalem are still to be decided by the Israelis and the Palestinians in negotiations. The United States has not advocated changing any of the arrangements at the Temple Mount Harim al-Sharif. The president specifically called for maintaining the status quo at the holy sites. Finally, and critically, the United States is not predetermining final status issues. We remain committed to achieving a lasting peace agreement. We support a two-state solution if agreed to by the parties. Those are the facts of what was said and done this week. Now there are a few more points that are central to the discussion of this issue. Israel, like all nations, has the right to determine its capital city. Jerusalem is the home of Israel's parliament, president, prime minister, Supreme Court, and many of its ministries. It is simple common sense that foreign embassies be located there. In virtually every country in the world, U.S. embassies are located in the host country's capital city. Israel should be no different. The United States took this step in full knowledge that it will raise questions and concerns. Our actions are intended to help advance the cause of peace. We must recognize that peace is advanced, not set back, when all parties are honest with each other. Our actions reflected an honest assessment of reality. I understand the concern members have in calling this session. Change is hard, but we should never doubt what the truth can do. We should never doubt that when we face the truth, believe in the human spirit, and encourage each other, that peace can happen. To those who have good faith concerns about the future of peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, let me again assure you that the President and this administration remain committed to the peace process. To those who do not act in good faith, pretext for violence, you are only showing yourselves to be unfit partners of peace. Finally, I will not let this moment pass without a comment about the United Nations itself. Over many years, the United Nations has outrageously been of the world's foremost centers of hostility towards Israel. The UN has done much more damage to the prospects for Middle East peace than to advance them. We will not be a party to that. The United States no longer stands by when Israel is unfairly attacked in the United Nations. And the United States will not be lectured to by countries that lack any credibility when it comes to treating both Israelis and Palestinians fairly. It is no coincidence that the historic peace agreements between Egypt and Israel and between Jordan and Israel were both signed on the White House lawn. If and when there's a historic peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians, there's a good likelihood that it too will be signed on the White House lawn. Why is that? It's because the United States has credibility with both sides. Israel will never be, and should never be, bullied into an agreement by the United Nations or by any collection of countries that have proven their disregard for Israel's security. To my Palestinian brothers and sisters, I can tell you with complete confidence that the United States is deeply committed to achieving a peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We have demonstrated that commitment over many years and with the investment of large quantities of financial resources and diplomatic energy. Sadly, peace between the two sides has not been achieved, but we will not give up. Our hand remains extended to you. We are more committed to the cause of Israeli-Palestinian peace today than we've ever been before. and we believe we might be closer to that goal than ever before. Both Israelis and Palestinians have very real stories to tell. Painful stories of challenges, distrust, and destruction. But this conflict is not just about the past. It must not be about all of those painful stories. It must be about future generations. Palestinian and Israeli children both deserve a future of peace, one no more and no less than the other. When those children are grown, they should look back and look to this time when the parties genuinely negotiated for their sake. These Palestinian and Israeli children deserve to have hope of a brighter and more peaceful future. Our wish and prayer is that this is the time both sides stop thinking about present needs and start thinking about future generations. I urge all countries in the Security Council and in the Middle East to temper their statements and their actions in the days ahead. Peace remains achievable. We must all do our parts to achieve it. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement.
All right, so you saw the UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador, Nikki Haley, talking. And I don't know if you caught that just then, but this was important because what she was doing was then outside the lines of talking about what the president did yesterday with regard to Israel, which is where she started, recognizing Jerusalem, the holy city, is the capital of Israel, as the Knesset, its modern government is housed there. So should our U.S. embassy be there, was what the president was saying, and then Nikki Haley then furthering that. But then she got to this point about the damage that the United Nations has done on its own to the Middle East peace process and how it is deemed, and I'm paraphrasing her here, to be making some anti-Israel moves over time. And do we have time to come out and chat about this just briefly? I'm asking our team here because I see you with a big thought bubble. Do you want to express it?
Yeah, they have been anti-Israel. That's just the fact of the matter. And I think this needs to be said. This is a bipartisan issue. People voted on this. They said that they wanted it in Jerusalem. And they need to keep the promise. It's bipartisan, people that are still elected into office and former presidents. So I don't like how this has been planted as just President Trump going rogue. He's honoring not only his promise, but the promises of former presidents as well as senators and congressmen.
By the way, 6 months ago when they voted on this in Congress, it was unanimous. That's what you're talking about.
Correct.
Not to mention all the previous times they did.
Year after year.
We'll move on. New developments now after congressional leaders met with the president yesterday. A deal is struck to keep the government running, but it won't last long. And another huge fight looms just days before the holidays. Will we get a government shutdown for Christmas? Yikes. Stay close.
Well, hello and welcome back to the couch. President Trump signing off on a temporary spending bill averting a government shutdown, at least for now. This after Congress passed the stopgap measure that funds the government for the next 2 weeks. Yeah, that's all. But lawmakers still face a turbulent road ahead as they look to draw up a broader budget by the new December 22nd deadline. The president hosting congressional leaders from both parties yesterday to try and hash out a long-term solution. There was plenty of optimism going in.
We hope that we're going to make some great progress for our country. I think that will happen. We're here in the spirit of let's get it done.
We're here to reach a bipartisan agreement to finish out the year, and glad that you invited us and happy to be here.
So everyone was there in good faith, but Democrats still had some demands, of course, including a DACA fix, as the future of hundreds of thousands of immigrants brought to the U.S. illegally as children hangs in the balance.
If they come back to the table, we can start conversations, but it's going to take us some time, and we're just going to have to find time to make sure that we can accommodate all of these things.
We will not leave here without a DACA fix.
Nancy, so flexible.
She might be hanging around then.
Yeah, she'll still be there. Hope she brought camping mats. So, Lawrence, let's discuss this a little bit, because I think in the spirit of the holidays, it is nice to see lawmakers from both parties come together, because it has been such a contentious year after such a contentious election. So it's nice to see them sitting around the table. The problem is, now they're going to spend a bunch of money.
And I'm mad as hell about it. I mean, it's my generation that's going to be paying for this. And so I don't mind if we shut down the government. They need to feel how average day Americans feel when they can't pay their bills.
Yeah.
Then the lights go off. And so Donald Trump went down to Washington and he promised that he was going to drain this. And so I would like to see a balanced budget amendment. If they're going to come together, let's talk about.
Was that a nod, Jessica Tarlow?
It's a half nod. It's a nod to the balanced budget.
What is a half
Yeah, I
nod?
saw that.
To the shutdown.
You almost got an amen.
Shut it down.
I'm just saying.
That's what happens to us at home when we don't pay our bills.
Well, I think that a government shutdown is very dangerous, specifically for the employees who are then not going to go to work.
I thought
and they're
they
not
said
going
they're
to collect
non-essential employees, though.
Yeah, they say that, but we know that that's not the case. I think that it's bad. And bipartisan, this is 2 weeks of bipartisanship, maybe. And we know they're going to pass something else, and it's going to be another month. And then we'll do it again in 3 or 4 months. There are a lot of Republicans who also want this DACA fix. Why can't we just,
Well, here's the pushback on that, is there needs to be comprehensive immigration reform.
That too.
And that has been necessary for quite some time. Both sides agree to that. They have very different means for getting there and different ways of input.
Right.
However, I have to say, it's kind of funny to watch Democrats sit here and hold the Republicans' feet to the fire over tax reform, howling that it's going to add to the deficit.
I know.
But meanwhile, all they want to do is add more domestic spending, at least, in addition to spending a bunch of money their way on immigration.
I totally agree.
These are programs that we cannot afford.
Not to mention the fact that there was, like an 86% increase in the national debt under President Obama. But look, if you're the Democrat Party, I don't blame them for trying to extract some concessions. This is what you do when you're in the minority. They're trying to leverage the power that they do have. Okay, so if you want us to vote for this stopgap funding measure, then, let's get something done with DACA. That being said, if you're the Republican Party, don't play ball. You need something better than just moving forward with a plain DACA bill. They need to push for something like the RAISE Act, which Senators Perdue and Cotton have introduced. President Trump has endorsed and said that he supports. Get rid of chain migration, get rid of the diversity lottery, if I can talk today. Which I've already demonstrated I can't with my voice.
We feel blessed that you came in. We can hear it in your voice.
I would not.
I like it. But I have one of those voices.
But they need to push for more, and President Trump needs to use DACA, also leveraging his immigration priorities.
Both sides, if they're going to have bipartisan immigration reform, both sides are going to have to give up.
So why are we trying to, on that particular issue,
I agree,
then hurry before Christmas?
Yeah.
And
it doesn't belong here. You're absolutely right.
No, but a stopgap measure. I was born with gap teeth, so I know it takes several times to get that gap out.
I had braces too. It's okay.
And so, right?
Me
so
too.
I'm just wondering at this point why Democrats then are, pointing a finger across the aisle with tax reform and how fast it's moving, forgetting how, with Obamacare, that wasn't exactly the most open conversation the country has ever seen. There was some back and forth, but not as open as it should have been. But then on an issue as important as DACA, they want to rush it through. So I don't understand
Not just rushing it. How about you pick an issue that actually affects the American people first? Look, I'm not saying we don't need immigration reform.
Well, that does, because if you couple it with these other ideas like border wall and all of that, it becomes a national security, too. I mean, if you want to talk about it in a broad term.
But I mean, get tax reform done, get health care done, and then we can start talking about immigration reform affecting non-citizens. I don't think the base. I don't think
those dreamers are a huge
that.
economic boon to this country.
So
it's not just
we love
our dreamers.
We love an improving economy, and we are going to have to pay some of our bills. Serious new questions in the investigation into the Obama administration's surveillance of the Trump campaign. What was a top Obama DOJ official doing, meeting with the men behind the anti-Trump dossier during the 2016 campaign? This was unearthed by House Republicans, and now they want answers. Plus, states of emergency in 4 counties, and California officials ordering more evacuations amid the growing wildfire threat. A live report ahead. Stay with us.
I would urge everybody to be set. Have your stuff ready to go. We want people to be prepared to leave immediately.
I love Kiwi.
Look at your screen. Federal aid will soon start flowing into Southern California as President Trump declares a state of emergency due to the raging wildfires. There they are, a new fire erupting overnight near San Diego. That's 6 of those beasts. Flames tearing through a horse training facility. We now know 25 horses at least have died. 6 major wildfires have destroyed hundreds of homes in Southern California. 1,000 homes are still in danger, we're told, maybe more. High winds are expected to return today. So they got a little bit of a break overnight. It didn't make that much difference on the ground, and then now it's going to get worse. Will Carr is live for us from Santa Paula, California with more. Will?
And Harris, the winds have really died down today. That is good news, and the fire crews really trying to take advantage of that. So we have numerous helicopters out right now. They're going and picking up water from a nearby lake, and then they're attacking this hillside, trying to hit down these flames while they can, while these winds are down. Of course, we had 2 new fires yesterday, one of those in San Diego County. We know that fire has destroyed at least 65 structures, and it hit that horse training facility. We've learned that more than a dozen of those horses died in that fire. Now, this is all due to the Santa Ana winds that have been whipping throughout this area this week. We were on the front lines yesterday when they were blowing the hardest. Take a look at what we saw. These flames have raced down this hillside in just the past couple of minutes. They're being fanned by the fierce winds we've had throughout the course of the day, and you can see that they are eating everything in their path. Now, the reason this is such a concern is because on this side of the Pacific Coast Highway, you have a number of beach homes. You can see just how close all of these flames are. There are firefighters on the other side spraying these down, trying to do everything that they can to protect this community. As I mentioned, the good news is the winds are at a lull right now, but they're supposed to pick up and be strong throughout the course of the weekend. Harris.
All right. Will Carr, thank you very much. We appreciate that. We'll check back as the news lines. Kennedy?
This is Outnumbered. Thank you for being here. New revelations in the investigation into that dossier of salacious and largely unverified claims against the president. A top Justice Department official, Bruce Orr, was demoted this week after House investigators discovered he met with the dossier's author, former British spy Christopher Steele, during the 2016 campaign. He also met after the election with Glenn Simpson, head of Fusion GPS, the firm that hired Steele to compile the dossier. Orr reportedly did not disclose